here and now. I played the dice right and let the good times roll. One knee and one ring, forever it's our show. I don't know how and don't know why, but I'll be toasting all my life. Not the first time in my life I've heard the end. Start again. Not the first time I've heard answers I don't want. They're always showing up. I know it's worth more than gold. One thing I know, this for sure, I'll just wait again. Like sunshine never ends, I'll just wait again. Time I don't want back again, I'll just wait. Not the first time roads were blocked with doubt and fear. Trust me, they'll soon clear. Not the first time separation was so near. Just building for the years. I know it's worth more than gold. One thing I know is this for sure, I'll just wait again. Like sunshine never ends, I'll just wait again. Time I don't want back again, I'll just wait. I'll wait. Just wait. I'll just wait again. Like the sunshine never ends, I'll just wait again.
It's 2 o'clock. So, hello all of you. Welcome to this session. We're going to talk about circular economy in the everyday life. My name is Per, and I work at IKEA. I work with the retail part in how we meet the customers in different countries. During these days that I've been here, I've been hearing quite a lot around big organization strategies, big organizations that needs to come up with new ways of doing trade, governments that needs to take actions. But what about me? What about you? What about us, the many people? How should we relate to circular economy in our everyday life? And to look at the challenges that we have, just looking at the numbers that we later will see, changes must occur also in our lives. So I have with me a fantastic group of people that will join me in a number of presentations. We will have also a small panel, and hopefully, if time permits, we will open up to questions and answers then to the public at the end of this session. So without further ado, I invite Vanessa, founder of OneLove, that will talk a little about sustainable living. Thank you, Vanessa.
Great. Wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. So in this forum, we're talking about scaling the transition to circular economies. And so what does this mean in terms of our day-to-day practices? What does this mean in terms of our habits and routines, our cycles of self-reflection? Typically, when we think about circularity in day-to-day life, we talk about scaling out solutions, for example, by expanding the demand for share or reuse or repair. We may also consider scaling up solutions, which is changing the policies and market conditions for sustainability. But I think we're actually missing a scaling opportunity. And to get to it, we need to look and put people at the center of circularity. And not only do we need to do that, we need to take a dynamic perspective over time. When we look across our lives, our daily routines actually change. How we move, eat, where we live, how we play, what we consume. And the opportunity for scaling happens when we see these changes, not in terms of just individual choices, but in terms of the cultural context within we live. So beyond scaling out or scaling up, I'd invite us to think about scaling deep. Tatiana Fraser, Darcy Riddell, and Michelle Lee Moore define it as scaling deep is about impacting our cultural roots, our relationships, our values, and our beliefs. Okay, so does scaling even matter for our day-to-day lives? What is our household footprint? We actually have a big, significant ecological impact. Our global greenhouse gas emissions from the household consumption is 60% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. We're also 50 to 80% of the total land, material, and water use. We need to shift our carbon footprint targets to get to a 1.5 degree world. We need to go from 4 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per capita per year down to 1 ton by 2050, according to a 1.5 degree lifestyles report. So if our habits have these massive impacts, and they're so critical for achieving sustainability, how do we shift our impacts? You know, I often hear amongst all of us, how do we change individual behavior? And it's not easy. 40% of our behaviors are habitual. We don't even think about them. We repeat them, they're not conscious. So behavior change, scientists alert us that we shouldn't just be pushing out information on its own because we don't make necessarily rational decisions. But instead, there's great potential in moments when our habits and routines are already in flux, during life transitions. Think about moving house, becoming a parent, immigrating, starting school, dealing with unexpected events, retirement, career changes. Studies tracking people over time have found that life transitions are windows of opportunity for shifting to sustainable behaviors. We're more open to change. People buy secondhand after having a baby, or they might switch to a plant-rich diet after a health scare, or take public transport when they shift to a new job. Routines are shaken up, our habits are temporarily unlocked. Life transitions, I want to say, can be harnessed for scaling circular demand. So how do we do that? Well, we don't want to place the burden on individuals. Life transitions are very stressful. They're stressful times. So instead, let's look at the fact that life transitions are times when people are figuring out who they are and how to behave in ways that align with their values. It's this cultural context that holds the key to scaling deep. And in many ways, this isn't new. Think about traditional cultures and rites of passage ceremonies. So to get better at scaling deep, all of us, let's draw on the work of University of Surrey researchers Kate Birmingham and Susan Venn. Imagine Carlos and Sophia have just had a baby. Becoming a parent is not just one moment, but an ongoing process of change. Carlos and Sophia might start by shifting their practices after their baby is born to growing and cooking their own organic food, but then shifting their practices back to buying food when they return to work. They need support to maintain their practices. Consider also how Sophia and Carlos's lives are linked to others. For example, say Carlos's father has a sudden injury, and they end up taking care of him as well as their child. Many transitions include multiple transitions over time and together at once. Their practices are also shaped by others, the needs and desires of their new baby, their parents, friends, and community. Sophia and Carlos have unique life transitions, but they're dynamic processes interconnected with others. And those people can encourage or discourage sustainable behaviors, and Carlos and Sophia can serve in their routines of circularity to normalize and mainstream these behaviors in their community. So instead of seeing our behaviors as separate, let's think of them as interdependent, and most importantly, nested in cultural contexts. Shifting demand and impact is about understanding how these cultural dynamics of our daily routines are actually embedded in our culture and what we see as convenient and normal. Taking a shower every day, the foods we eat, how and when we commute to work, and how our products, services, policies, technologies, and infrastructures shape these expectations. Our cultural contexts guide our definition of a good life. And currently in our mainstream culture, that's about acceleration of accumulation of more and more stuff. So we know we need to change that cultural paradigm. But how do we do it? I propose that all of us in this room, our circular economy activities serve a much deeper purpose. And each of these life transition changes are opportunities to scale our circularity by enabling full circle living. What constitutes lives well lived? Each of us throughout our lives experience many transitions, and what are we reinforcing with each of these transitions? We speak about the life cycles of products. What about our own life cycles? Each turn around the sun brings new lessons and wisdoms. And the circle itself in the circular economy gives us guidance not only for cycling materials, but for creating circular living cultures. The circle is an elegant archetypal shape. It suggests reasonable containment. It suggests balance and connection. It's a shape that marks the passage of time that allows us each to reflect and refine again and again, whether that be about our own full circle lives, or about the long cycles of history, stories passed down through generations, the day turning to night and back again, or the orbit of our planets. As we engage in our work on the circular economy, we're also engaging in a process of cultural change, reorienting ourselves away from an extractive, cheap, throwaway culture. And because ultimately the circular economy is the means and not an end in itself, an economy is how we organize to meet our needs. But the ultimate end is human well-being and health within the life support systems of this planet. That's what our KPIs should be measuring. So when we ask about sustainability and the circular economy, what we're really asking about is something much more foundational. How we can be alive and thrive, interdependent with each other and within nature. So embracing full circle living is celebrating life transitions as vibrant opportunities to reflect on where we've come from, setting our sights of where we want to go, and each phase in our lives gives us a chance to really reflect on the deeper question of why. Why are we making this choice? Why am I energized by this practice? Why do I feel trapped doing this other practice? Are our practices inclusive, regenerative, restorative? This is a chance not just to scale out and up, but deep, when each of these transitions brings us to ask essential questions together. So practically, what does this mean for your work? 3 things. First, we need to shift from consuming to living. And what that means is that let's not just see people as consumers or customers of circularity. We've emphasized consumption for good reason. Household consumption is in food, mobility, goods, housing. But if we find solutions that just start there in our separate domains, we miss the opportunity to look at our interconnected lives. And when we do that, when we look at our interconnected lives, we have a chance to show ourselves in our full and complete identity and guide our daily living through that way and take a more active role in scaling this transition. The second thing we can do is redefine value. We often talk about retaining value, and each of these transitions is an opportunity to not just think about the value of materials, but as John Ruskin wrote in 1860, there is no wealth but life. What are the other things we value? This includes human-made assets like tractors and houses, the wealth embodied in people and their skills, community trust and connectivity, in knowledge from the Wikipedia to the genome, in our thriving biosphere from the forest floor to the ocean floor. So when we talk about internalizing externalities, typically we talk about environmental externalities. What else have we externalized? We know that innovation in the circular economy gets spurred by community connection and trust. Finally, a focus on full circle living, it means our circle of allies expands. Life transitions are times when we need support. Imagine what happens as a child transitions to become a youth and from a youth to adulthood. Who is supporting these transitions? What other transitions, such as career changes, the end of life, changing homes, who's supporting these? And imagine how your work could be enabled by connecting with families, friends, career counselors, immigrant support, wedding planners, real estate agents, artists, faith-based community groups, and elders. In your circular economy work, how are you engaging these groups? So finally, what are our legacies as we do this work? The legacies of lives well lived are ones that are not wasteful and everyone is valued. So really, what is full circle living? We shift from seeing ourselves in terms of our own personal just consumption to our lives living and thinking about the bigger circle, the biosphere, cycles of cultural change, and our own life transitions. The opportunity I present to you today is to scale smart by harnessing these life transitions as a way to scale deep and shift our cultural foundations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Some really, really interesting insights there that I can definitely relate to. I mean, every time something happens in my life, and there is a change, there is this opportunity to do something positive. And this is really something we have to think of all when we develop different solutions, services for the circular economy. Now, just to look at the figures around the life at home, I want to invite Marcus from Citra, showing us a little facts and figures about our impact at life at home.
Thank you, Per. All right, short title is always good, so I put as many words onto here as I could. But the purpose of today is to actually give you a glimpse of work, a piece of work that we've done for the past 2.5 years. We started with a small team here in Finland to look at, can we change the everyday habits of Finns in a way that a new habit would create a smaller environmental impact than the current habit? And we came up with a list of 100 things you can do differently. And we have a team of 10 people all being paid by Citra to work on this, and we couldn't go through the 100 things. And then we figured that, maybe we need something else to engage with people. And we designed a small test. By answering 27 questions, we can get individualized tips for you. How can you as an individual or household lower in the most efficient way your personal environmental impact? And this test has now been done in a roughly a little bit over a year. It's been done more than 700,000 times in Finland, and we're a country of 5.5 million people. So there are many of us who are interested in how do we change and impact the lowering of CO2 emissions in the world by changing our lifestyles. After we looked at the 100 things, we thought that how do we depict that what does a good life look like if we would adopt a 1.5 degree lifestyle. So it's not enough that you pick from a menu of 100 things what you like. That is the way to start the journey. But if you really want to live according to the limits of the planet, you need to adopt quite drastic changes in the next 30 years. But this report that we've done together with the university locally here called Aalto, and then Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, which is based in Japan, we've looked at what does this change look like in different countries. So we've compared Finland, Japan, China, Brazil, and India. And it's amazing to see that relatively similar things you would assume would make same impact in these countries. But the study shows that actually the tools are very, very different. First, to give a few numbers like Per was promising. So you can see here the countries on the bottom, hopefully, and then the average CO2 impact per person per year in these countries. And you can see that Finland is leading. Maybe not a good sign. Then you can see a few yellow bars here, and they point to reduction targets. And you can look at carbon footprints on the basis of an area where they are emitted. So this is how the Paris Agreement is constructed. Or you can look at emissions based on the consumption. So where are these products used instead of where they are produced? And that's what the lower line of the yellow is. And you can see that the change is quite significant that we have to embark on, every single one of us. And all of our CO2 impacts can be related to 4 things that we do. Every day, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we need to eat. We need to live somewhere. We move about in the world, and then we buy products and services. So those are the 4 main categories. We've used here 5, so we've also highlighted leisure and services because that contributes quite significantly as well. If I just take a few examples, here you can see food, and how you read the graph is so that you can see the current footprint of a Finnish person, Japanese person, a Brazilian. And on this axis you can see the amounts that we consume. So in case of food, it's kilograms of food that go in our mouths. And then for each type of food, there's their carbon intensity. So how much carbon is emitted for a kilogram of food to be produced. And you can see here that our current area is like this, and we would need to move to this type of square here by 2030, and by 2050 we would need to squeeze everything into here. And then you can see differences between different countries, and if I just pick one example, so if you want to reduce the CO2 impact of food being eaten in Finland, you could adopt some cuisine choices of Brazilians and start to eat a lot more beans. So there's 10 or 20 times more beans being eaten by a Brazilian person compared to a Finnish person. and asking my Brazilian friends that do you enjoy your food, they say it's the best in the world. So no compromise in taste. Another peculiarity here with food is that in Finland we use quite a lot of dairy-based products. So we drink milk, eat a lot of cheese. And in other countries, like in Japan, you can see that it's much, much smaller amount of dairy products that are being consumed. So you can reduce your impact by changing what you eat. So that's a kind of model shift. Or you can reduce the amount that we eat. So in the 1980s, we were not eating 1,000 kilograms per Finn in Finland. We were eating roughly 800 kilograms. So we've gotten used to eating bigger portions. So there's a link to health benefits as well. So if we can reduce the amount and change from meat to other protein sources and eating more vegetables, we can lower the CO2 impact and also be healthier going forward. Okay, very quickly about then living or housing related impacts. So here the point that we are trying to drill in is that there are certain choices that we make. We are using, for example, in Finland, coal to produce electricity. 4% of the energy amount is produced by coal, but 21% of the impact comes from this. So if we just get rid of coal, we can get rid of 21% of our living related CO2. Same is true for Japan. So 16% by coal, 37% of the impact comes from there. So there are things that are interconnected to the systems that provide us with the comfort that we've been used to. So I'm not saying that every single thing is in the hands of an individual. We are locked in certain systems. We live in a city where electricity or heat is produced in some way. Those decisions are made by the politicians. But we need more and more products and services by companies that help individuals to adopt new behaviors in an easier, more fun manner. And if you are really into these numbers, we have the technical report that is behind this report available at the back of the room, and there's a small summary in between the reports. So if you're interested, you can grab that report. It's also available on our web pages. Then if we look at differences between transport, you can see that Finns move about quite a lot. So 16,000 kilometers per person every year. Whereas in Japan, 12,000 kilometers is enough. You can also spot quite a major difference here that almost a third of the kilometers moved in Japan are done by train or metro. Whereas in Finland, you barely see the green here. So definitely by moving people from the car to the train requires a lot of investment by the country so that there's actually a working public transportation system outside of the 4 bigger cities that we have. But in Japan, there's been major investments for the past 20 years into the train system. So it's relatively easy to use the trains in Japan. And you can see that in India, there's quite a lot of ferry use, so people use ferries. And then you have a lot of motorcycle kilometers being driven. All right. I already talked about the ways that you can reduce your impact. So either work with the amount, so reduce, or you can switch the type of service or product that you use so that the carbon intensity goes down. And here the business opportunity lies. So whoever can give people efficiency improvement, so the same consumption, so you can drive the same amount of kilometers with your car, but with the smaller carbon intensity. This doesn't mean that you need to change necessarily your car. You may be able to just change the fuel that you use. That comes with the lower CO2 impact. And then the second business opportunity is here with the modal shift. So if you can make something else more convenient, easier, cheaper than driving of your personal car, you will definitely be making a lot of new business. Okay, I got a 2-minute mark, so I'll jump to my last slide. Research is always fun for some people, but practical implications. How do we go from research to action? The team behind the research also came up with an innovative way of how to do a lifestyle puzzle. So each of the 100 different things that you can do in your day-to-day life have a certain square area here that they eat away of the 10 tons that an average Finn emits per year. So you can start maybe by investing into a heat pump in your home, or you reduce your flying time a certain amount, or you switch to a vegetarian diet. There are many, many options. You place them on this puzzle, and you can see that people are really surprised that by 5 or 6 changes in their day-to-day life, they can actually go to 3,000 tons of CO2 without sacrificing their quality of life. And this comes as a surprise to most people who go and do this puzzle. And that's a real learning to us, that many of us are starting to connect to the fact that this is not an impossible task, but this is something that we can do in 10-year chunks. So 50% reduction by 10 years, and another 10 years, another 50%, another 50%. And then we are down to a ton of CO2 per person. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marcus. It was quite amazing work you have done. I will for sure grab one of the copies. My feeling was that actually the figures we have seen many times maybe, but not put together in this way, which at the same time give a perspective, but also a hope then to put together this puzzle that we all have to put together. And now comes an embarrassing moment for me. I have to introduce myself. I'm Per, as I told you. I work at IKEA. I've been happily or luckily involved in IKEA's circular transition the last 5-6 years, which has been a journey that I will tell you a little about. First, we have also on our site in IKEA, if you're interested, you can download our People and Planet Positive strategy. It's a second version. The first one was launched 2012, but it was not definitely the first time we started to speak about sustainability in IKEA. We have done a lot of things, but mostly hidden it somewhere and not talked about it at all. And I think with the People and Planet Positive, it was also our stand to go out and speak about what we're doing, and hopefully then inspire ourselves, but also others to go in that direction and maybe even a little faster. You all know this. I don't have to dwell. There's a lot of challenges. I have heard some more during these days, which makes me even more eager to really contribute to the change. And one of the big change drivers for IKEA is our vision. This is our vision, a better every day for the many people. It's very wide, of course, but it speaks about the many people. The many people, that's me, you, us, all of us. So reach is important for IKEA. And to give a better everyday life, meaning helping our people in their everyday sustainable life at home. When you write a strategy, you cut the strategy in different ways, I think, just by habit, I think, and we did it in 3 ways. The first one is healthy and sustainable living, and that's really where we talk about what we can do together with our customers, inspiring a sustainable life at home. The second one is circular and climate positive. That's more how we operate. How can we, as a company, lower our impact? So being circular as a business, but also then working very heavily with the climate work we do. And then fair and equal, which is our social part, and how IKEA can actually contribute to the communities around our shops, stores, supply chain, and so on. And really also be leading in our social agenda. The interesting part here is, where do we place circular economy? You might think in the middle, because we speak about circularity there, but what we actually understand is that it goes as always crossover. It's about how we engage with our customers. It's about how we construct our value chain. It's about how we take social responsibility in a circular economy. And this is our ambition for healthy and sustainable living. We meet a lot of people. We wrote 1 billion here. I think it's just, we could take a number here, but we really mean a lot of people. And we meet them in our stores, we meet them on our website. And how can we engage and inspire people, 1 billion people, to live a more sustainable life at home? We don't have all the answers, but we are building as we go. And it was really interesting to listen to you guys before, because we get constantly new inputs and ways of doing. And to do this together, we started some years ago with a pilot project in a city in Sweden, where we worked with some customers and co-workers. We elected them as pilots out there. So we helped them with information and some products on sustainable life at home, and they used those products and shared the experience together. Not only as a group, but also out in social media. So good ideas spread. And this now, from a pilot project in one city in Sweden, has now spread out. And I think now also in Finland it's really ongoing. So building on one person, two persons, many persons, and really inspiring people to live a more healthy and sustainable life at home. We have also, of course, products linked to this. And Tobbe, if you listened to him yesterday, our CEO, he spoke about the LED and how we shifted from one source 100% to some other light source. But we are now also embarking that in enabling our customers to produce their own electricity. So we have now 5 countries, 6 countries upcoming, where you can actually buy PV panels in the IKEA store. And this is sort of, how can I say, sort of bending a little the idea of home furnishing, but really with the intent to be sustainable. But don't worry, we don't ask our customers to go up on the roof to assemble the PV panels. You will get the service. So now a little about circularity and circular IKEA. Reason we call it circular IKEA is our take on circularity. Of course, we have this broad vision and you can say philosophy around circular economy. How do we adapt that to IKEA then? How can we do the best out of it? You all know this again. I mean, I think just to mention a few words about the resource scarcity as a driver inside the company. The company is complex. A lot of people have different targets and goals and responsibilities. One big driver was not really coming from sustainability or circular people, but really just looking ahead and seeing how much material do we need to have as a company to grow and be a company also in 10, 15, 30 years. And when you start to see that picture, you also start to understand that, oh my God, we need to do something. And that comes from hardcore purchasing, not from me as a sustainability guy. We also see changing customer behavior. I'll go a little deeper into that a little later, but really something is happening out there. Just an example, I mean, I have, they are not even teenagers any longer. My kids are grown up, and they have a totally different way of seeing ownership. Ownership is not as important as it was for my generation as for theirs. So something is happening out there that also is linked with sustainability. That's really interesting. So what are our actions? We're going to redesign actually the whole range of IKEA for circularity. And we have developed then a set of 9 design principles for circularity, going everything from design for recyclability, but also really design for longevity. How do I design a furniture that will not be out of date, out of fashion in a few years? So it's really to take a 360-degree on the design. This is easy to say, again. We need also to develop the skills that comes with it and experiment and learn. And of course, if we do this right, we can also use, together with new business models, our products that we produce today as materials banks for tomorrow. But there is a lot of things that needs to come together here. Looking at the customer then, and starting up or ending up here in the theme of this afternoon about us, we, people. So how do we see at IKEA the meeting, a new circular meeting with our customers? We travel around the world and went to different countries. We went to, I think, 11 countries. We went to have deep interviews with people. Not talking about circularity now. Not even talking about furniture or IKEA, just to understand in deep interviews where are the issues around their life, what do they see. And this is the result. And interesting enough, they are not so different in different countries. So we expected a big variety depending where you are, but these are sort of basics actually that we have used later on in developing our solution. So first of all, people don't want to be wasteful. It hurts to throw away something that is still working or a value. And there is a value in each thing. And this emotional value is the biggest of them all. Yeah? So if you have a connection with your things, you will keep them longer. And the third one is actually maybe changing a little. I would say quite a lot compared to when we started. Maybe a couple of years ago, it wouldn't have been so clear. But people now start to understand that they have an influence. They want to make part of a change. They want to be there, but they also want the guidance as a company, from us as a company on what to do and inspiration on how to do it. Go very quickly now. Some just examples of what we're doing. We're sort of dividing this in acquisition of the products. This is more internal, but we have a number of services around the world in the stores where we resell second-hand furniture in most of the stores, and here in Finland too. We have online collaborations with online platforms then for second-hand. We're also looking into how we can help people with the product life, so offering spare parts, fittings, but also doing workshops, IKEA family workshops on how to repair your furniture, how to repurpose your furniture. We heard about these life-changing moments you need to change maybe your furniture. And then how then we can, if you don't need it any longer, how can we help our customers to pass it on? Second-hand sales again, but also different business models. And this was the announcement we did 2-3 weeks ago. So we will actually next year, so we talk about not in 10 years, we talk about 2020, we will do tests in all our countries around furniture as a service. So we're trying to take all of that, what I showed you before, into one business model. And it's not only about leasing. I should be really, really clear here. It's not about leasing furniture. That we can do tomorrow. But it is doing it in a circular way that is important. So we can take back the furniture, refurbish it, and use it again. Otherwise, it's the same. So these are the 4 commitments: products, materials, new business models, but doing it together, all of us. We can't do this by our own. And most important, we don't know how to do it yet. but there is a fantastic will to do it for the future and do it together with you. And most things has not been done. Glorious future. Thank you very much. So, thank you myself. So, I invite you, Joost. Joost, you have a fantastic story to tell, I think,
Sure.
what you're doing with mobile telephones in Africa. I'm really looking forward to hear.
All right.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Can I have the clicker?
No, you can't.
Okay, fine. Thanks. So I'll stand here, otherwise I'll be a bit of a caged tiger normally. So then I'm stable. Thanks so much. Great introductions. And now for something completely different. I'm a businessman, I'm Dutch, and I have a very small organization, so forgive me for being a little bit ignorant and also somewhat blunt. Somebody has to do it. I'm part of probably one of the coolest industries in the world. Marcus will definitely agree. Telecom. We're quite proud to see how much telecom has brought to the world, and I've been in it now for 17 years. But it also brought me some insights. First, actually, circularity is a bit too much about the beautiful future. In 20 or 40 years' time, we will all be sustainable or waste-free, and nothing will be spoiled or anything. That's great. But it's not something that's happening right now. And with that, the discussion gets a bit stuck in the future. At some point, it will all be great, so what do we do now? And especially if you look at this number, it becomes a bit more clear that there is some activity to be done. I think this is a number that has been mentioned before, the current circularity percentage globally. So this is a reality check, I would say. Not something that is shocking for most of you, I assume. But it is a bit of a strange situation that we talk about how circularity will change the world and what technology it will bring and how our lives will be great if we also have this. Sorry for, again, a bit of the shock effect, bluntness. But this is the current situation for electronics. This is near Accra in Ghana, where electronic waste unfortunately cannot be recycled and as a result is being dumped. So that's a huge opportunity for the circular businesses because this is potential income. But it also creates a huge disconnect because again, we're talking about a sustainable and almost utopic also for telecom discussion, how great our industry is, how much it is bringing for the sustainable development goals, how lives are being better, and also in emerging markets, how much value is being created because of mobile phones being used. Digital access is doing great things. But if you then compare that to the discussion of waste, which is unfortunately for electronics the biggest discussion we should have, the biggest issue, e-waste, the biggest or fastest growing waste stream in the world, it creates a disconnect. Because for a consumer, you just hear about the great positive things that your product is doing for you, and then at the same time, also this is also it's also true. So for an individual, it becomes very difficult to connect those two discussions. You have beautiful futuristic discussions, and then, well, let's just ignore the right part because that's not really part of the telecom industry. It's a waste problem. It's an issue. Let's try to ignore that. I think for a lot of consumers, that is a huge obstacle to get engaged in circularity because, yes, we all believe in the future, but right now, this is the reality. So, as an individual, what is now actually my position? Am I supporting something great, or should I be an NGO and fight a problem? Right now, it seems to be two completely different worlds. And that's for one part because circularity for mobile phones, a very complex product, it has to be realistic. So if you want to buy a mobile phone and you want to be circular, well, you have to, don't read it because it's, the intention is that it means that it's complex. It's very complex. Thousands of companies are involved in production. Many organizations have different business models that are all, well, quite linear. So as an individual, asking somebody to be circular in their consumption of mobile phones, well, you cannot do that. The whole of the industry currently cannot do it. So this is not realistic. Circularity for mobile phones is not realistic if you want to do everything, the whole value chain, differently. So that it needs to be different. We need to have something realistic. We also need to have something inclusive, because mobile phones are global products. They're being produced often in Asian countries. The resources are from African countries in majority. And also the e-waste, unfortunately, ends up outside of Europe. So if we would have circularity for the Netherlands or even for Europe, it would be a bit ridiculous, unethical actually. So inclusive is crucial, especially for products such as mobile phones. But it also needs to be easy. We're looking at consumers. This is actually a picture that was made for the UN to explain for consumers how to get started on saving the world. And this is level 1. I hope there are more levels. But the first is really, this is what a lot of people prefer. Not to do a lot of things, do what they're doing currently, and then link that with a little bit of more sustainable consumption. So it needs to be easy, it needs to be effective. Because yes, we want great, big change, but as a first step, you will not engage people with something very complex. And I have the solution. So what we feel is needed is a very practical, realistic first step towards circularity for phones. And considering the clear issue that we have right now with enormous waste and the continuous consumption of phones, we thought let's combine those two, consumption and waste. The thing that we've developed is circularity as a service, and again aimed at consumers that prefer things to be simple. It's a bit similar to carbon offsetting, but we actually feel you could offset materials much better. So not CO2, but CE offsetting. Because then you make your purchase, your material footprint of the product that you buy, material neutral. I'll explain a bit how it works. Not local or national EPR, but global. Again, because these products don't stay in the country where they're being sold, and they're not from the country, they're not being produced there. We call it 1 for 1. So I think the name already rings a little bit of a bell. If you have one product, then you should also have another product. And so our idea is not to double the impact. If you buy one product, then you give another one away. But if you buy one product, you should have one product recycled. And that creates a huge demand for waste. Because what we are now doing, as we are offering this service, is we are offering a proposition at the moment that a phone is being bought or sold. So one phone, for example, here in Finland, is sold to you as an individual. That means more material scarcity, that means more waste. But if you link that purchase of the phone that you've bought to the collection of one scrap phone, and that scrap phone is collected and recycled from an emerging market where the waste is currently being dumped, you create a loop, a closed loop. So it's comparable to offsetting, it's comparable to EPR schemes, but it's really focused on the individual. You're not paying huge programs where you don't really know where the funds are going to. It's about you. You buy a phone, you pay a small fee. That fee is used to collect and recycle a scrap phone. So for us, as I mentioned, that generates a huge demand. We are now in huge need of scrap phones. We've been collecting scrap phones already since 2012, so we're quite good at it, so that's the good part. And this actually turned out to be our supply chain. We collect in emerging market, as I mentioned, African countries. So far, over 2 million phones have been collected, and then ship them out of countries where this recycling, electronic waste, cannot be recycled in, unfortunately, the whole of Africa. So a bit more simple, actually, it means this. Working together with local networks, setting up collection programs together with local businessmen and women, and then making sure that the waste is being exported to proper recyclers. I'll not explain how difficult it is to do the middle part, but it's very difficult, unfortunately. It took us 2 years to export a container that we collected with electronic waste outside of Ghana. and then make sure that it's being properly recycled. But this is now what we are offering to customers. When they buy a phone, we collect a scrap phone on their behalf. Customers such as Rabobank that use this service to educate their employees and their customers on what circularity is. It's a complex discussion, it's a complex topic, so can we make it a bit more simple, more practical? Educating employees also means engaging them. The employee uses a phone every day, so if you use that product to educate and explain how circularity works, it becomes an education tool. Thank you. Customers such as the City of Amsterdam that wants to do green procurement, maybe now just for the role that they want in society, but also in the future for compliance reasons. Customers such as T-Mobile, an operator that now has a service to offer to customers that want to do green procurement, that want to buy a phone in, let's say, a guilt-free way, and now are able to do this through their regular supplier. So again, T-Mobile sells phones and now includes our service. Every phone that T-Mobile sells is offset through our program. But also for governments, one of our customers, of course, is my own government, who use our approach as a way to deliver on SDGs. Because, to be a little bit arrogant there, I feel that this type of business could be a great way to replace development aid. We're now funding green business. We're paying to have waste recycled in emerging markets that would otherwise cause pollution, cause damage. So it's for the Dutch government a way to actually effectively become a support for the SDGs. So, I mean, the clear goal, I think, the rest of the conference explained that very well. We need to do a lot. Everything needs to be different. There's a huge end goal of circularity also for the telecom industry. But to act now, we need tangible benefits. We need individuals, people, companies, the industry itself, to see that they can benefit also from this proposition. We need to generate a social value. We pay for this waste, generating jobs and income in emerging markets. We turn the waste into metals, so to create circular value. And of course, the commercial value that I just explained as we offer the service to our customers. So for us, we feel that the telecom industry, and with that mobile phones, can be the first waste-free product in the world, and with that create a blueprint for other industries to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Joost. Thank you very much. So I will invite the panel up to take their seats, and what we're going to do now is to have a few questions, pre-prepared, easy questions. So we warm up, and then we will let you in with your questions from the public. I think we have a couple of mics that we will then use. So, of course, it was really interesting to listen to you all, and it all boils down, I think, to a change of lifestyle that we need to do. And some years ago, there was a project in Stockholm called 1 ton life, where a family went down to 1 ton of CO2 emissions per year. And I had a chat with him, and I asked how it went, and he said, well, you know, after sometimes we hit different levels, but we really managed to get to 1.5 ton emissions for a week. It was quite tough, no warm showers and all of that, and it was quite a bleak situation. Do we really think that we need to go down in quality of life, reaching also a sustainable life, or do we have to really think about cold showers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, oftentimes we do ask, are there a lot of unmet needs in a 1.5 degree or one planet life? And I would say there's just also a lot of unmet needs in the consumer society as well. Joost, you just identified a number, how some of the ways that we're living today create gross inequalities, but they also create isolation and a sense of clutter, and there's a kind of depression that comes from feeling very individualized. So I think there's a lot of ways in which our current society also has a lot of unmet needs. And to me, a lot of this shifting to one planet living has to do with also kind of redefining the good life and what is well-being, and some of the things that we really seek that you emphasized from IKEA. You know, this idea well-being actually comes from, of course, a certain level of basic needs met, but also health, social connectivity, trust, a sense of purpose. And so can we orient our lives around those things? You know, the Center for a New American Dream, which is now called New Dream in the States, has this wonderful phrase. They don't just say more, they say more of what matters. So I think that that will be, you know, a way of orienting around a lot of these changes, you know, the puzzle pieces that each of us are going to go through.
Right, and very often in these pilots, it's not really chosen by the individual what they should be trying. So someone else is forcing you to use some format, which includes cold showers for some reason. I don't know why, but there are many options that are not really considered by people that produce quite a big potential of lowering your CO2 impact. And those are often forgotten. So that I think confuses the conversation, that big, medium, and small things are not really clear to people. And we've interviewed experts and said that if you would be king of Finland, what would you require from people? What would be your top 10 list? And they were different. So even experts don't have a kind of single view that this is how you should do it. Therefore, we ended up kind of looking at the menu of 100 where you can pick, but we show which are big, medium, and small things.
Right. Actually, I heard in the last few days that people actually experience pain when they throw out products. Did you mention it just now? So that's not something that you would try to stimulate. So I think reducing waste clearly also has some benefits for, let's say, this cleaner lives here. But me being a little bit of a hippie as well, I think circularity also has a huge value globally to bring more equality. So maybe some lives will be less materialistic, and some people might not like that. But a lot of lives, especially in other parts of the world, will benefit a lot from more circularity.
Yeah, and coming back to the guy in Stockholm, I asked him also a question: would you do it again? Would you do the same test again? And he said, no, never. and I said, was it the cold showers? No, it was not the cold showers. It was that I was so bloody alone. So he felt, the pain he felt was that he was alone. It's about something, I think, to create something, a movement, and to really start something that brings us from this 9% to something much bigger. So how do we start this movement? How can we really stop talking and doing things as people? Any ideas?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things is what Joost was just mentioning. Often we talk about lifestyles, but we can also look at livelihoods and ways of living, because it's not just lifestyles, it's kind of this whole package. And so I think one of the richest ways of starting a movement is realizing that there's not a one-size-fits-all one-planet life. In fact, around the world right now, there are many, many people living 1.5-degree lives, one-planet living, and there are a lot of traditional practices. There's a lot of ways of being that actually have a lot of these clues for the movement. So to acknowledge and celebrate that, a colleague of mine, Idina, runs a Hungarian NGO called Green Dependent, and she found a whole apartment block of people who are living 1.5-degree lives, but they had aspirations. They felt pressured to live a different life. And the work she did with them was just to acknowledge what they were doing and celebrate it. And then they started becoming really proud, and they're like, oh, we are the future, we are the ones, right? And so flipping it around and really looking for that and enabling that diversity. And the other thing I would say about envisioning or stimulating a movement, Joost, I agree with you that we don't want to think about it as being in the future, And one of the things that One Earth, my nonprofit, does is work with storytellers and science fiction writers and Imagineers and filmmakers to start imagining what life and sustainable futures, sustainable days could feel and look like. Because I think if we give people both the experiences and the visions, and if we can start to imagine it, it can also be such a big catalyst for the movement.
But I also think that the way that we talk about 1.5 degree lifestyles or changing our habits is relatively negative driven. So we've done something wrong, we need to reduce, we need to stop, we can't live like we've done before. So that's not something where you build a movement on. So a movement is built on something that is exciting. So you see an empty dance floor, and the first person who is brave enough to go there, he's actually not the movement maker. But the second person who joins, he or she makes the movement. So someone is brave enough to look at someone who's doing something differently, joins them, and then the movement starts. So we need the brave person to be the first on the dance floor to make a fool out of themselves. But then we need a lot of these second persons who will join them, and then the third and the fourth. It will grow. But we need a more positive tone on what can you do more of. So instead of saying don't eat meat, don't drive your car, you talk about the maybe other benefits of eating more vegetables and shy away from saying that don't eat meat. And that will lead to the point where people will eventually eat less meat, but they won't really realize that that's happening.
Yeah, I fully support that. I mean, what we've, I think, done wrong, as if I can also include myself in the sustainability movement, in the last 40 years was the doom scenarios, right? Which the world will come to an end and it's all our fault. Yeah. That's not a great motivator indeed. So if you look at positivity and also rewarding the better things to do, so not so much punishing, but the rewarding, I think it will be actually about talking, not stopping talking, but talking and talking about the positivity, because there are some great stories to share, and people are really interested in learning what they can do to make the world a bit better, because that's engaging.
So we've heard so many times also during these days that now it's time not if but how. So in this context, what piece of the puzzle is missing actually to make start this movement? We have some first dancers on the dance floor, but where are the second and the third?
Yeah.
What is blocking them?
Well, I think it's sometimes the way we're framing it and what we leave out, as you say, these missing bits. So I think two things that come to mind with missing bits. I think the first is things like the investment structure, the finance. Let's talk about consumer debt, right? I mean, living beyond our means, which has been really amplified and supported by a sense that you can just continue to purchase in order to amplify this consumer-based economy. So I think that's one thing that I would like to see as something we need to shift is on the investment and finance side. The other thing that I think is really a missing bit is that we, as I said earlier, we approach life as if it's these compartmentalized aspects, mobility, housing, food, and a really powerful way in to start really driving it is thinking of other entry points, well-being, as Marcus is saying, health, that we come at them. For example, there is a European Union research project called Glamours, and one thing they found, which I thought was fascinating, is they realized actually our day-to-day lives, our ways of living, we don't get up and say I'm going to consume, but instead we have these ways we spend our time or the places we put our focus of attention. Wanting social connection or wanting to contribute, and that at the moment is defined through work often, but we contribute in many ways, or wanting to restore ourselves or relax, or wanting to have some time to build our health. And these are perhaps the motivators, and some of them have consumption, associated consumption practices. So I think if we reorient around what is the actual thing that people are wanting to do, then there's much more potential. As Marcus is saying, if we just look at the consumption patterns, then we're telling people don't drive, don't eat red meat, don't do all these things. But instead, it's what do you want? What is your life about? What are you doing? And then ask, okay, what's the current impact? Can we still satisfy the same need or the same aspiration in a different way? I think time use and where we place our focus is one of the biggest drivers for changing our daily lives.
Right, and as we've lived for the past 30, 40 years in the world of consumption, I think that companies still have a strong role to play. So what is deemed to be desirable and something to kind of go and grow towards, I think that's something where marketeers in many companies could use their skills and drive behavior to those directions that create smaller impact but give you other benefits in your day-to-day life. And I think that's something that companies can really do to help us to make the first step in adopting a new habit. We need better products, easier things to use, and so forth. So there's a lot of business opportunity here to help us to live a life according to the limits of the planet.
Well, I'll promote my industry a little bit, which is also the industry of social enterprises. I'm a real big fan of companies that try to combine, let's say, the NGO perspective of making a little bit of a better world, but still creating a business model. I feel it could sometimes be challenging to ask, well, let's say linear companies to become circular. I mean, it's great to see that there are champions, but there are not too many yet. Whereas social enterprises, which is really an ecosystem that you need to create in a country, they have by default the basis of combining business with also positive impact. And I think that's a type of business that really has the future.
Thank you. I must congratulate you. You have been extremely time efficient. So we have plenty of time for questions, and I see one there already. Do you have a mic? A couple of mics?
Hello, I'm Carla from Berlin. And I have been there part of a project named CLIP, where 100 households tested it for 1 year to reduce their footprint. And it was very good to be several because we could interact. But what you mentioned, that people feel alone, is also about because they, with consumption, sometimes they kill their feeling of loneliness. And if there no any more consumption, they are confronted with themselves. That's important in my eyes. In this case, also to think about the possibility of psychology, environmental psychology, to now, in which you mentioned a little bit the windows of opportunities, because it's the main point. It's not about knowledge, it's about how to get them to action. And in this case, I would like to know self-efficiency also. If you don't learn to have the feeling, I can do something, you wouldn't do it. I would be interested in closing the loop, sorry. If you are fighting also dealing with companies who are telling their clients will have a new phone every year, for example, and what you are telling them about programmed obsolescence, the same for IKEA. Are you fighting against programmed obsolescence, for example?
Thanks. So usually people have more difficulty pronouncing my name, but indeed closing the loop. I'd say that if you start with this topic in a simple, appealing, but also practical way, then the topic becomes an opportunity to discuss more on. So yes, you can bring this discussion of planned obsolescence, repairability, and many other topics that are still issues within the telecom industry. You can bring them on the table first, but then they will say, well, it's not my fault, I don't have to do it. If you bring something positive where they can benefit from first on the table, and as a side effect, put the topic of circularity on the table, that's at least a strategy that I'm trying to follow.
In IKEA?
Thank you. Well, I think, going back to this being alone in a journey, I think the person I mentioned before in Stockholm, he was really feeling alone because he was the only one doing things. And what to talk about and dinners with his friend. He couldn't really simply relate. And I think this doing it together, doing it in a big house or doing it virtually has its very strong role. And we are now experimenting with an app at IKEA, what we will call a Better Living app, where actually people can join in the movement and really get some ticks, but also then understand what is the impact of, for instance, then changing traditional light bulb to LED or anything, or changing diet. So we're experimenting with this kind of putting people together in a movement, definitely.
And the planned obsolescence?
Yeah, the planned obsolescence, it's, I think, within the design principles that we have, not the design obsolescence, but the circular strategies that we put in design. And of course, there is a different life expectancies for products. You have a different life expectancy of a sofa compared to a toilet brush. The toilet brush is not meant for long use, or at least not in my house. So there you have to, have certain principles on how you choose the material. It must be, of course, very easy, recyclable, and so on. Whilst in a sofa, you have to apply other ways of thinking, or a solid wood tabletop, for instance.
For example, electricity. It's the main topic.
So
Lamp construction, like LED. Sorry. Lamps, for example, electricity. We have also kitchen things, I think, in your...
So what we're trying to define is really what is the fit for purpose of the product, and then design accordingly. And of course, then we need to add in ways of prolonging the life, like defining spare parts that you can retrieve after some time if you want to repair or restore your products. And also then link then repair and second life to it. So it's a whole set of techniques, but what you want to avoid is that once you as a customer don't have a use for the product, but still has a life, that life can continue. And and do also business out of it, because that's we are a company. We need to survive every year. So it's really making a business out of it that will be the challenge we have. And again, we don't have all the answers, and we're testing and hopefully failing also sometimes, so we learn not what to do.
Thank you very much for the great presentations. Alex Hahn from Circular Berlin. I really love the phrase Vanessa said, and shifting from consuming to living. And to that point, I also wanted to ask, how can we enable the current business owners to shift from pursuing for more profit to become enablers for people to truly enjoy living?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's really about also, this is why I focus so much on the culture. Like, where are we placing our attention within our culture in terms of what we see as a good society or a good kind of life? And at the moment, a lot of the focus and all of our measures are about the economics of how we're living our lives. And we haven't, and there are countries and initiatives and companies expanding from just a profit motive to think about other benefits, for example, in a B corporation, or expanding to look at sustainability as being core to the purpose. So you see that shifting, but I think ultimately what you're asking is absolutely accurate, that as long as we're keeping our eye just on the indicator, is a company achieving more profit, is it returning a quick return on investment for its shareholders in the short term? If we keep those as being the main metrics of how we're doing as a society, then we will not make the shift to a circular economy. My colleague Nicole Amboyer, who works with One Earth, she was saying to me, sometimes you think when you hear circular economy discussions, it's like we're trying to take the extractive growth, profit-driven square and cram it into the circular economy circle. But the point is, we have to redefine what the orientation is. And in our case, of course, we want to orient towards living, well-being, thriving biosphere and dynamic economy that serves those things. And that requires thinking about profit in a much richer way.
At the same time, I also, as being part of a company, we also need to understand the business potential of it, because if we don't find the business potential in, let's say, circular, then it will become a sort of a marketing event, more just for being nice, but it will never be brought to scale. So really, to make the scale of it, we need to find the business, not in making people consume material, but to live a better life at home. And that, if we find a way to be a company within that view, then we will be truly circular, I think.
So thank you for some very interesting presentations. So I think one of the successes of circular economy has been that, at least in Denmark and the Nordic countries, no politicians today are really against circular economy. No one really believes there's sort of anything negative in it. However, if we look at sustainable consumption, sustainable lifestyles, I think we're looking at much more of a minefield. So we have general elections in Denmark tomorrow. Around half of the politicians are for various measures that will support sustainable consumption. Half are sort of really, really hardcore against it. We had Greta Thunberg in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago. She was calling out the Lord Mayor that if we looked at actually consumption of Copenhageners, we were nowhere close to reaching our targets, which is like a statement that will put any politician in defense position. So how do we engage the policymakers around this, given that even though we talk well-being, we talk desirability, this is about lifestyle change? How do we engage the policymakers around this, or should we just ignore them and have this be a movement-based, bottom-up, individualized approach?
I can definitely speak to some of that. So I think when we've been working with One Earth, with cities and with national governments, part of what we've done also in conversation with Citra has been about looking at different aspects of this transformation in our ways of living and looking at who has the capacity to enable and support the different aspects. So when you're talking about public transport systems, then of course there's a lot of room for a heavy role for government. Or if you're looking at bylaws that help building, for example, smaller and communal dwellings or better public spaces, then that's definitely a big role for government. When we're in the past, when we'd speak about dietary change, that becomes a hot potato issue. Government saying this is how much we think people should be eating of red meat and dairy. That's a hot, as you say, that's a hot potato issue. So in those cases, we're looking at more larger social movements, the place for markets to provide plant-based protein alternatives. There's a lot of entire institutions like Utrecht University, where I'm based as well. All of their catering is vegetarian. So there could be these larger shifts that just make and enable support. So I think part of it is also thinking about who's playing which role in this enabling environment around sustainable living. And as you rightly say, when we look at the individual, we often think about individual purchasing choices, but we should actually be thinking about collectives, neighborhoods, community groups, workplaces, and within those, the individual can be supported as well. Governments have a critical role to play, but not necessarily having to play the role across all of those different solution spaces as the primary actor.
And I would just say that what we're trying to do here is to show that there is grassroots movement, so that people are accepting the idea that something needs to happen. And then the politicians are not so afraid of making a decision that will end up them not being elected to their role. So I think it's vital that we use digitalization to make this change visible somehow, so we know how many people are adopting which new habits, and that's ongoing. So similar what IKEA is doing with the app, there are other companies who are looking into how do we make this change visible in a digital platform.
And I think, also to set the narrative right, my question to you guys of the cold shower was a little provocative. I think a truly circular life will lead us to where we need to be, and most probably living very good life or even better life for the future. So it's to set the narrative. Again, as somebody said, yeah, we should not point fingers. We shouldn't say, oh, you cannot drive. We should use the narrative which we know has a positive uptake from policymakers and people.
Yeah. Oh, you guys feel so excited.
Yeah. They want to start now.
Is it the coffee after this?
I think so.
Yeah, we have time for one or two more questions. Don't be shy. I see some movement there.
Good afternoon, and thank you for very insightful talks and conversations thus far. My question is more from the developing country perspective and the example of cell phones. In terms of social and economic beneficiation of communities, was one of the options around was to export the e-waste, but the option of actually looking into setting up infrastructure so that the African continent could, grow socially and economically. Was that considered? And what's the feasibility of offsetting and beneficiation within the circular economy model?
Sure. So there is an opportunity, but the only thing that needs to change is just about everything. So there needs to be legislation, consumer awareness, infrastructure, companies that are doing this type of business. So we're taking the first step, but the clear goal should be also local recycling. It's quite ridiculous that in the whole of Africa, you cannot recycle a mobile phone properly. I mean, it's bizarre. 200 million phones are being sold per year on the continent, and there's no place to recycle it. So that's a bit of an opportunity. There's a lot of value in this waste. So if we can recycle it locally, that would be great. But first, we need to make sure that you collect, because that hasn't been done before. So that's what we're doing. And that you have a business model that works, because just collecting and then spending a lot of money on waste reduction, it's a possibility, but it's not a strategic long-term solution. So the two things that we're doing is collecting, now 2 million phones, and creating a business model so that at some point you get enough funds to create local recycling facilities. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. But I think definitely in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll get started. Good point.
Oh, 2. There you go. I think gentleman there was first.
Hi, this is Görkem from Sustainable Development University in Eberswalde. My question is, so for a sustainable future, we need different measures than gross domestic product, or also in terms of companies, maybe different measures than profit. So I was wondering whether it is in your future plans or it's a discourse in the business world to speak about, like, okay, when we set targets, maybe it shouldn't be profit, but rather we have to measure by impact in terms of environment, sustain and social impact and sustainability?
Yeah, I guess it's linked to me, that question, and yes, we're doing that. We're trying to assess the impact and value the impact from a social and a sustainability perspective in the different decisions we are doing. I mean, it's a journey also that. I mean, it's a changing culture that needs to happen inside the companies. So we are developing right now different KPIs that we can use to take the real good decisions when we take, for instance, an investment decision. But it is a journey. So we are in the beginning. We are starting to use these tools, and we are learning as we go, so to say. But I think you touch a very important point here. We should not at all look at only the profit. We should all evaluate the different options concerning profit for sure, but also then environmental impact or social impact.
Hello. I'm Michael Lettenmeyer from a small consultancy called DMAT here in Finland. We are presently running a project called Sustainable Lifestyles Accelerator, where we do a kind of program with households where they measure their footprints, then they make roadmaps for themselves towards 1.5 degree living based on the puzzle Markus introduced us, and then they start experimenting kind of parts of these options they have chosen into their roadmap, and so according to our experience, they are able to reduce their footprints by some 20-30% immediately. And the exciting thing is that many of us, not all of them, but many of them are telling us that their quality of life improves when they are starting to live more sustainable. So for us it looks like, well, Vanessa told us about these kind of disruptions in life where there might be a potential for disrupting lifestyles, but it seems that these people are able to do that any time when they just get the opportunity. So the question would be how to provide these people the opportunity to just start trying out changes in their lives.
Well, Michael, of course, you've been working with on the 1.5 degree lifestyles report, one of the co-authors there. And I agree with you. I think disruptions don't have to be necessarily these transition moments, but a lot of people, I think the transformations are underway. As you're saying, you're seeing a difference in how people think about, young people think about ownership. These transformations are taking place. There's a lot of hunger, a lot of movements already underway. And I think the power comes when we combine understanding of movements and behavior change with the numbers, getting really clear about what is a larger footprint thing, what is a smaller one, so people can really get very accurate and strategic and prioritize and also see what's doable in terms of their work, in terms of their lives, and then connect that to well-being and justice. So when we make those connections of these opportunities, the movement, the numbers, well-being and justice, I think this is where we're going to see breakthroughs in daily lives as an entry point for the circular economy and sustainability, and as the end point, right, quality of life. Yeah.
And I think also sharing these experiences is super vital. So you start to understand that this is doable, as you say, 30% immediately.
And others are doing it, so we are a species of crowds. So if we think others are doing it, then we are more likely to do it ourselves.
Very, very true. So very true.
And I think there's parts of our lives that we haven't even opened up for observation, right? Like, think about how we use the phrase work-life balance, as if work is one thing and life is another. I mean, what is work if it's not life? Is starts to become a question.
Depends where you work.
Exactly, depends on where you work. But these kinds of ideas that living is outside of the work world, right? And so we get up in the morning and everyone has to get up and go to their workplace in many places at the same hour, which means we have a lot of people sitting in cars with emissions, and time spent in that time, all to arrive at a certain time and then to depart at a certain time, which was a model based on industrial processes, right? So what is the future of how we create our contributions into society? And is it still going to be the same kind of ways of working? We know the world of work is shifting. What about livelihood? There's a lot of places in the world where the challenge is actually to enable people to live lives with their own livelihoods, in their own ownership again. And these are traditional practices that we want to restore. So I would just challenge everyone to look at our daily lives and all the things we see right now as just being routine and habitual, and pose questions. Look at it from a justice perspective. Look at it from a gendered perspective. Look at it from a numbers perspective. Look at it in terms of well-being. Because I think if we start looking at it that way, we get so many more interesting entry points for also and opportunities for the circular economy and for landing on a sustainable futures. So that's one thing I would definitely encourage everyone to do.
So unfortunately, time is. We have time for one very quick one.
It's more an idea, because on my webpage I'm collecting solutions. There is also a handbook of how to get people from knowledge to action, so some who is interested in it could come to me, give my card.
Great. Thanks.
Perfect.
Oh,
Great.
So,
Or you can buy my product.
so time is up, and I wish to thank the fantastic team here with a big applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But before we leave, I mean, hooking on to your point here, I urge you all, including myself, to really go out now after this meeting and think, what is then now my next step? So tomorrow, what can I do, changing my habits to live a more sustainable life at home? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is from each and every one.